topics.
I actually think most people, when they try to become intellectuals, try to stay pretty broad. In fact, it's one of the biggest mistakes, say, a graduate student in training might make, is to not specialize fast enough, far enough, and to try to stay too broad for too long. So, in some sense, we all would like to be broad, and the world forces us to narrow, forces us to specialize.
Right.
So, I just sort of squeaked by when I should have been more specialized for career success, and then I've sort of ignored the career success signals more than others might, and just stayed with being broad. Now, you know, there are different intellectual skills and strategies for being broad, but I think it comes naturally to most people. It's a matter of whether they are willing to do it, and then can they figure out how to do it.
Right. It's a little bit risky. So I have a million different things I want to talk to you about. I'm just gonna pick one of them out of a hat randomly.
Okay,
I read a paper of yours. It was a 50-page paper, and it was what was it titled? I'm gonna find out what it was titled. One second. It was shall we vote on values but bet on beliefs? And one of the
there we go.
ideas in there that I thought was interesting was having our government be more modeled after speculative markets, the way stocks
Right.
work. Not like I think you used the term gambling. It's not the term I would use, but um, it's an interesting idea, and I kind of want to talk to you about it because my big concern is I'm not really a huge direct democracy guy. I think representative republics tend to be a little bit safer from the wild passions of the masses. So I'm curious. Would we be concerned with like a stock crashes, but governmentally, if that was something we employed, and why was it attractive to you in the first place?
So, government makes a lot of big decisions and they often go wrong.
Yes.
And in general, decisions are a combination of facts and values. That sort of basic decision theory says, you have a utility function for your values and you have a probability function for your facts, and you combine them to make your decisions. So if we look at government decisions and we ask, where does it go wrong? I think it goes wrong more in the facts, or at least the facts are a sufficient explanation. That is, because often government panders to public opinion, and it basically panders to the public's conception of facts. And then the government does what the public thinks might work, and then it doesn't work because the public's wrong about what
Right.
works.
About all sorts of things. Yeah.
So, but you know, you might think, yeah, but the public should at least be able to set the values, like the overall priorities, and then maybe experts should be able to say facts are. But then the question is, how do we actually pick the experts so that they actually make good expert judgment rather than it being another way to slip values in supposedly expert judgment? So, I think in some sense we should all be able to agree that roughly what we want is some somewhat democratic values, i.e., values that represent sort of the distribution of the population and somewhere in the middle. But we want the facts to be expert. We want, so for example, if the United States invaded Iraq a while back, and
Yeah.
you might think, well, that was kind of stupid, but the public liked it in the sense that it sort of gave the public something they thought they wanted, in the sense that, well, they wanted to be safe, and it felt like that would make them safe, and that would get back at those bad people who had hurt them. But the experts kind of knew that was wrong. But the way we set up government is, going to make the government do what the public wants, not just in terms of values, but also in terms of beliefs. So my
Right.
proposal for betting markets is to try to separate those two and to leave the public in charge, similarly with values, indirectly, say through representation, say, instead of directly perhaps, but still leave them roughly in charge of values, but not put them directly in charge of facts. And then you
So,
might say, well, we could have an agency of experts who decide who the experts are, but they could be taken over by various value factions. And
right,
so
as we've
the
seen
idea is that
recently.
betting, right, but
Yeah.
betting markets can't. Betting
Hmm.
markets are a very robust way to get the facts. So
Interesting.
when there's a price in a betting market and you think it's wrong, then you have a financial incentive to go trade in the market, fix the mistake, and make money. And if you're just bullshitting and you're claiming there's a mistake, but you don't really believe it, then you're not really going to be that eager to go bet.
Right.
Because
Forces people to
you'll
put the
be
money where
losing
their
money.
mouth is. You're right. Right.
Exactly. So that's the whole idea, is to set it up so that the facts are set by the people who are betting, who are willing to put their money where their mouth is, but the values are still set by the voters or the citizens. So that's the challenge of the design.
Well, let me ask you this. If everybody is allowed to bet, provided that they're willing to put down money, aren't you still having the public fundamentally arguing about what the facts are? Or is the money just too great a hurdle that it doesn't that problem doesn't arise?
So at the moment, there are orange juice futures markets out there. You don't know that, but you're allowed to go express your opinion on orange juice futures. I'll bet you haven't done that. You haven't exercised your citizen's right to express your opinion on orange juice futures. Why not?
Well, because I don't know and
because
don't
you
care
think
about
you'll lose money.
right, and because
Yes,
I don't know and don't care. But what about say I have a question. I'm not trying to straw man you here. I'm just trying to understand. So what about
no,
like
please.
would this apply to like the COVID vaccine? So like early days, would people be
Sure.
betting on whether or not they think the COVID vaccine is legit? Would that be an example, or would we leave that to like the CDC, for example? So what kind of facts would be bet on exactly?
So for, say, the COVID vaccine, then we would need some sort of independent evaluation to be done later, and then we could predict earlier what that independent evaluation would be. And then we might be wondering, who can we trust to give an independent evaluation later? So, for example, there might be a randomized experiment, and we could bet on the outcome of the randomized experiment. But it is always, an issue of how do we exactly decide who we trust about sort of the outcome. So the idea for Futarchy, which is my name for this betting market-based government, is that we measure national welfare after the fact. So as you may know, there's this thing called GDP.
Yes.
That measures the overall size of the economy. And to a first approximation, economists use that as a measure of how well nations are doing in the world. It's not a terrible approximation. And so honestly, if we just had policy maximize GDP, it would probably be better than the status quo.
Right.
Just if they just consistently adopted policies to make our country rich, we would probably just be better off. But we can do even better than that. We can do even better than rich. So the idea is, at the moment, people have discussed adding things to GDP. So even from an economist's point of view, GDP isn't perfect. There are things we value that it doesn't include. So it doesn't include, say, lifespan. It doesn't include, say, the capital and the environment. It doesn't include our pride and what sort of international respect we get.
Right.
So we could start to add things to GDP. We could make a bigger measure that was a closer measure to what we wanted. So that, for example, if we max out on GDP, maybe we'll try to push people to work all the time. And maybe we don't want to work all the time because, hey, we like leisure. So if we put a measure of leisure into the overall measure, then it'll trade that off. So the idea is we still have, say, a Congress, and we still elect representatives to Congress. But now the only job Congress has is to figure out what is national welfare. So they might start with GDP, and they could add counting trees and add counting lifespan and leisure. And they could argue about like which things got how big a weight, and that's their whole job. The whole job is to decide what we want, because this is the measure of what we want. And every year, or every few months, some government agency is going to go out there and measure the things that go into that calculation. So they can say, okay, what is lifespan and what is leisure and what is the environment or whatever. And they go measure those things like they do with GDP, and they combine it into the measure, and they announce every quarter or every month, national welfare is now 12.2. Mm-hmm. And then next quarter they say national welfare is now 12.4, right? And they just announce the number of what the national welfare is, and that would be how we would decide how well we're doing. And then I can have the betting markets only try to figure out how to achieve that. That's the idea.
Right.
Is, so we will just have a measure of what we want, and the betting markets will say, well, this is what you want, then this is how you get it.
So the betting market. So it seems that the betting markets aren't like replacing Congress or anything. They're just kind of another metric, another source of information, much like
Well, they're
GDP.
deciding facts.
Right.
So Congress is still going to decide what we want, and then the betting markets to decide how to get what we want.
Right.
But
Yeah.
what we want is
Certainly
still in
interesting.
charge.
It'd be super interesting to run this for a few years. I would just be interested to see how much more accurate the gambling markets are than whatever like the line is, like the main line that's being given. It'd be interesting to see which one's more correct more often. It's like the collective wisdom of people betting money versus, what we get told. It'd be interesting to see for sure.
So obviously, I recommend that we try this on smaller scales before an entire nation. That this
Yeah.
image of the nation is to inspire the smaller scale efforts. But you could do this in a club or a firm or a town. The basic mechanism can be applied at all sorts of scales, and of course, you should try it on smaller scales first. But the
Sure.
idea is it is possible to use betting markets as the source of expertise about facts, how we know what works.
Right. And then you have follow up of like more traditional expertise to see if the betting markets were right or not, like as you say. Um,
Well, the whole point is all we need to know is what that national welfare 12.2. Remember? So
right.
if these people over there and they say 12.2 and we believe them, that's all we need. We don't need any other evaluation because basically the key idea is we're just going to have the betting markets say which policies are more likely to increase this national welfare. And we don't need any other verification of their judgment if that's
And you
all we
read
have. That's the only thing we need.
so last time I'm gonna poke you on this probably is so like in the case of the Iraq war, right? Wouldn't all the like what is to keep the gambling markets because we're all, tied up in patriotism and national pride from all going really hard and agreeing that we should invade Iraq, even though the
Okay, right.
experts say they're not supposed to.
So So say we're asking how does the war in Iraq affect national welfare, right? So obviously one way it affected national welfare, it was expensive. It cost hundreds of billions of dollars, even
Right.
trillions of dollars.
Right.
And that, ex ante people would know, so that's one way that our national welfare would actually see the effect of the war, right? Another way would be we might have, say, gone into Iraq to protect the oil supply, right?
Right. Yeah.
And then the whether or not oil prices were high would also be reflected in national welfare.
Mm,
And
I
then we
see.
could even have a measure of national respect if we wanted that in. And we could do surveys later on now, say, well, what does the nation, what does the world think about us after our
Right.
great performance in Iraq?
I see. Yeah.
And and that then we would actually be measuring the various consequences of the war. And now, before the war starts, knowing that we're going to look at the consequences and that's how we're going to judge the value of these assets,
If
then the
this went
people
well.
trading would say, well, what do I think the war will do to these things? Do I think the war will in fact keep oil prices low? Do I think the war will in fact
Right.
not cost very much? Do I think it
Right. It's
will produce
specifying the problem.
international respect? Right. So
Right.
we're the key point is national welfare. If it embodies everything we care about is somewhere on that list of things that it's measuring,
Right.
then when we ask the speculators, hey, will doing this increase national welfare? They're going to be looking at all those things. They're going to say, oh, let's see, the war will have this effect on this and this other effect on that, and they'll be adding it up and they're making a judgment. And if they're wrong, they're going to lose money, and if they're right, they're going to make money. And some of the people are just going to be wrong, and they're going to kind of fade away because they're going to lose. They're not going to have as much money to play with. The people who are right will be getting more
Consistently.
money to play with, and they will come
Right.
to have a stronger influence.
Yeah, so I'm that example helped me understand. So there's like two things I like about this. And one, it's like the specification because our politics right now is like, are you for or against blank? But in the example of the war in Iraq, you have like a million different criteria. It's like oil futures, national pride, your taxes, American blood and treasure spent overseas, like all of these
Right.
very, very specific things. Instead of just saying, are you generally for or generally against, it actually forces people to use their brains and think about something specific and put their money where their mouth is. And the system gives less of a say to the people who are regularly wrong and more of a say to the people who are regularly right. This is a very interesting idea. I would like to see this done at small scale. This would be super cool to see how this works.
I can tell you how you could do it for a firm and the CEO as a
I'm
smaller
interested.
scale version of it.
I'm interested. Tell
Okay,
me.
so think of a for-profit company
Yeah.
with a stock price, right? There's a stock market. And this key choice, do we keep the CEO or get rid of them?
Like Twitter,
For example, yes. But
for
now we
example.
want to know whether keeping the CEO is better for the stock price. That's the way we're going to ask the question.
Mm-hmm.
Because we say, presumably what the owners of the company want is for the stock to be worth more, for the company to be worth more. And so the owners of the company want to pick the CEO who's worth the most to the company. So if we focus on the particular decision, we've got a CEO, and the question is, do we get rid of them and replace them with somebody else, or do we keep the current CEO? And in this case, the stock price is the measure of what we care about. So it's like the national welfare, but it's much simpler. We don't have to go mess with things to find it. It's right there and easy to deal with. And all we have to do is now make two what's called off stock markets. And then we'll have our answer. So in an ordinary stock market, you trade stock for cash. And then anytime somebody goes and trades in the stock market, what they're supposed to be doing is saying, okay, what kind of scenarios could this company be involved in? And in each scenario, how much revenue will it get? How much profit will it get? And then they're supposed to average those up, and then that's what the stock price should be. And if they do that calculation and the current price is higher than that, they should sell. If the current price is lower than that, they should buy.
I've lost you. Chat, did you lose him? He froze. Okay, he's gone. Chat, I don't think this is my fault. Robin, I lost you, buddy. Come back. I was interested. I had more questions. Bop, bop, bop. Again, the question I'm going to ask him in a second is stocks. The stock, yeah. Robin, you might want to or Dr. Hanson rather. You might. Sorry, I'm just saying Robin because it's the name on the screen. You might want to leave and then come back really quickly. That might help. Or how about this? I'm gonna remove you from speakers and then I'm gonna invite you up again, and then hopefully that will help. But you just glitched out completely. The question I'm about to ask him in a second is the fact that the stock market is prone to crashes when it's gets scared. But actually, I don't think that really applies because we don't care if the speculators get pessimistic, right? It doesn't tank the economy. It just shows that they don't like something that's happening. So maybe the system works. I don't know. Dr. Hanson, I'm inviting you to speak here. All you got to do is click the button. I think there might be some technical issues on his side. It's all right. Colin is still a baby. It's still evolving. But guys, yeah, folks, crowd people, chat, please put in chat what you think about this idea so far. I'm very curious. In the meantime, while I wait for Dr. Hanson to sort out the technical issues. It's not me this time. Yay! Usually it's my fault, but if it's not a competition for resources needed for life, my screen is back. No sound, says Dr. Hanson. Chat disagrees. Hold on, I gotta type to him. Oh, you see him again? We good?
And
Okay,
I
you're
hear
back.
you, and I'm back. We are both
All
back.
right. Brilliant. It's all right. Hey, I have had so many technical issues on the show. You have no idea. Usually it's my fault, and I'm embarrassing myself in front of a guest. You're totally
So
good.
where did you hear? Where was the last part we were?
I lost you. We were just talking about how it's going to behave much like a stock market. We were talking about how it would apply to a private firm. In regards to a CEO, right. Basically, instead of trading stocks for cash, you just get to see how stocks are going to respond before you actually make the changes, and it's basically just a big old gambling pool.
So you can get a conditional stock price that says what is the company worth if I do this,
right,
or if I do that, and you compare those conditional stock prices, and it tells you which way the company is worth more, and then you can just do that.
Right, it's like a miniature of the same thing. Like a miniature low stakes stock market that you test things against before you do it in the real thing. That's interesting. Yeah. I've like it's an idea I've never heard before ever. I was kind of you didn't hear this, but I was kind of worried that it might be prone to crashes the same way the stock market is, but that doesn't really make sense, right? Because if the speculators get
Not really.
pessimistic, it's not going to crash the economy in the case of your
Right. So we're
example.
looking at the difference between two prices. So if the
Right.
whole market goes up or down, that won't necessarily change that difference. You'll
Exactly.
still
And
see
it's
the
not like
same
it
sign of
has
the
an
difference.
economic effect. It just shows that everybody doesn't like what's going on, for example. If the
What tells
speculators. Yeah, it tells you facts. He froze again. It's so sad, but I get the idea. I think we agree on this.
So
Okay,
I could
yeah.
tell you what the biggest disadvantage here is of this
Please, because
alternative,
I was trying to poke holes and I was realizing that they
right?
weren't holes, so you'd
Well,
probably
I
have a
have
better
more years
opinion.
of experience at poking holes at this.
Yeah, go ahead.
So,
I'm interested.
so a big problem is that it makes hypocrisy harder.
Good.
That is, we often have policies that we adopt for reasons we pretend to have, but we don't really have, but we like to look good. So, for example, we often make things illegal, but we don't really try very hard to enforce it because we just want to be on the books as officially opposing certain things,
Right.
even if we don't care that much about them.
Why is this a
Or
bad
we
thing?
often say, like, well, we often say things like, you know, the environment is so important, no cost should be spared to save the environment. And so a politician might run on that platform and then get elected and then do some things that supposedly do something for the environment, but they're not going to do remotely as much as they suggested they would. And people kind of like that. They like being able to be the good guy. And then, you know what, if the environment doesn't get done, you can blame the politician because they said they do a lot and we
Or the
elected
big
them on the
oil
basis of their
lobbyists.
promise.
I've heard a lot of that. I've heard a
Exactly.
lot of the reason why renewables can't work without subsidies isn't because the technology isn't there yet. It's because like big oil lobbyists are stopping it somehow. I've heard a lot of that. But I mean, to me that doesn't come off
Right.
as a drawback. I mean, like I would
Well,
love it if
so
my politicians were more honest because environment hang the expense is not a reasonable platform. Environment
well, so
within reason is a reasonable platform.
this
So
this is the
framing like you
nature of
said,
hypocrisy.
yeah,
Most people who are hypocritical claim they don't like hypocrisy. So
you
ask
accuse me.
yourself, who out there is it that likes hypocrisy? Because there's a lot of it, and they all deny that they like it. They all wish, they say, go away. But
I mean, my bet's on the
nevertheless, they
people who
keep.
do it. That's my bet
Sure.
for the people who like it. Is the
So
people that
here's
do it.
another example. You know, most police departments have an internal affairs division whose job it is to investigate malfeasance by the police. And
Yeah,
who does this internal affairs department report to? They report to the chief of police,
right.
which then makes it less likely they're actually going to really eagerly pursue things unless the chief of police wants that because that's who they report to. So on the surface, we're against police problems, but in our actual choice of policies, by the
Right.
choice of who the internal affairs people report to, that suggests we're not actually as eager to find it as we say. And
Right.
these sort of things
Right.
are all through society. We have all sorts of policies that we say we're trying to do one thing, and then the details push another
And
thing.
and you're saying that the speculation idea would basically destroy that, right? It'd be much harder
Well,
to
well,
be so
because you'd have
hypocritical.
to say what you wanted here. That is, you'd have to
Right.
put in the national welfare function. You have to say how much do trees count. You
Right.
put a small
Exactly.
number, then we'll just save the trees a bit. And we put a huge number, then we're going to save the trees a lot, but it's going to cost you.
Right.
And do you want to pay that cost?
Right. So, I mean, I personally don't think it's a bad thing that we're destroying a lot of our illusions. So, I'm still partial to your theory. I do have a question though, on the issue of marginal utility. So, if you like value a tree, however much you value a tree, that value is going to differ based on how many trees there are. So,
Sure.
will that basically just change? So, actually, yeah, the speculation market will just adjust for that, correct? It'll
Well,
just decide that trees are
what you
worth more.
need is that the national welfare function needs to take that into account.
Right.
So the national welfare function is going to count how many trees there are, and then it's going to say how much that's worth to us. And it has to take into account whatever diminishing returns there are to trees. So
Right.
it's the
And then
job
the
of the welfare function to say, well, how many do we want? And is more better, or is there a point at which we've got enough?
Right. And the speculators will probably take that into account too, I imagine, to some extent.
Well, the speculators will take into account whatever the welfare function says. So just like with the stock price, right?
Right.
The speculators aren't going to be evaluating whether this is a good product for people or whether people should be consuming this product, right? They're just going to look at, well, what gives the company profits, and they're going to recommend those things. Similarly, for the national welfare thing, the speculators aren't going to decide whether trees are a good idea. They're going to look at whatever the legislator has decided about trees, and they're going to say, well, if that's how much you care about trees, this is what you need to do.
Right. Interesting. I definitely like the system. I'm gonna jump to something else because there's just so much ground here.
Please.
Eventually, callers will call in and we'll take them, but
Okay.
it kind of works like talk radio, and they'll get to ask you a question and you'll get to answer, and it'll be nice.
Sure.
No problem. So you also had another piece on your blog. It was talking about national immigration and how countries don't really regulate immigration like locally from city to city or from state to state, but we do nationally. And you seemed like you seemed like you didn't know why we regulated national things. So the reason that I think we regulate national is something you talk about, which is potentially quality control. And this wasn't convincing. So if you want to talk a little bit about that, and then we can get it going. I'm curious.
So just in general, whenever we have a thing happening in the world and we're trying to understand it, one of our biggest levers is to compare it to other things we could be doing instead and ask, well, why are we doing this instead of the other things? Or why don't we use some other things for? So the more comparisons you can get into your portfolio here, the more leverage you can get to try to explain things by comparing what you're doing to other things you could be doing instead. So when we look at immigration, you could just think, well, we could have more people come in or less. And if that's the only thing you're thinking about, maybe there's not that many levers here, but there's actually a bunch of other comparable things to consider. So there are many units of social organization in our world. There's not just nations, there's states and cities, and counties and neighborhoods and firms and families and clubs. Yeah. There are all these different units. And then it's worth comparing our policies across these different kind of units and try to have a theory that makes sense of all these different choices together. So clearly, like, at the smallest family level or the roommates level, we're picky about who we have roommates, right? You don't just let anybody come and be your roommate. You get to decide. And churches or clubs can be picky about who's a member. Sometimes churches or something aren't picky, but they can be. Firms are somewhat picky about who they have. Landlords are picky about who they rent to.
Sure.
But even in these cases, we tend to focus on the opinions of people pretty close. So in a firm, if one division wants to hire somebody and some division somewhere else says, I don't think you should hire them, we usually go, well, yeah, but it's not your choice. It's these people's choice. Right. And let them choose who to hire, et cetera. Or if there's a neighbor 5 buildings down who doesn't think that your landlord should rent to you, maybe the landlord won't take that into account so much because they're kind of farther away. And so, we have choices like that, but they do seem to be limited in terms of their scope. And then, we have at the national level for, most nations in the world substantially limit who can enter the nation and who's, allowed to come in, and some of them even limit who can leave. But then we have these other units. We have like states, and we have cities, and we have neighborhoods. And we usually don't let those other units limit who can enter. Not only don't they do it, they're usually not allowed to. Like in the United States, for example, cities and states and even neighborhoods are not allowed to limit who could come in.
Well, you have gated communities.
And you have, but those you have to do some work to set those up.
Right.
And unless you set that up, the people who just live in an area can't just vote on who can come in. They would have to set up a very particular kind of community.
You can't just banish one person off the cul-de-sac. It's not a game show.
For example, right? You couldn't just have a town committee to decide who's allowed to be in the town and who gets expelled from the town.
We used to have that way back when, just banish people, but not anymore.
Right. So old Athens would kick people out. Sure.
Yeah.
But so now we want to explain this difference, right? So at the national level, we say, hey, we can't just let anybody come in here. We've got to have some quality control. But then at the state or the city or the neighborhood level, we say, you want to have quality control? No, you can't do that. That's forbidden. And that's a striking difference, right? It says it can't just be concern for quality here that's making that difference, because otherwise we'd let them all have quality control. We say, sure, cities, you want quality control? Fine. Yeah, it makes sense. Go for it. But we don't. We forbid that. And there are a few exceptions in the world, in China and Russia,
Right.
North Korea. I mean, these aren't great examples to follow, but there are some places where
kind of making your point.
Who can go where. But now, right. So now we want to explain that. And so I was honestly puzzled. So I wrote this blog post about it and I tweeted. And I think most people responding really weren't trying to explain this puzzle. They were just reacting. Immigration is one of these words. If you say it, people just have an opinion and they're just going to say their opinion and they're not listening to the rest of
I am guilty.
Right?
I am guilty.
Right?
I had a knee jerk when I read your tweet. But then I went to your blog and I realized you were asking a question, and then I got out of chimp tribal mindset. So one of the answers that occurs to me is simply because, as being within the borders of the city, of the state, of the country, you basically have certain rights.
Well, that's a choice.
Right, and that's a choice that goes back to the founding.
We could give the world rights to come in too, right? If we wanted to.
Right.
I mean, we could hand out all sorts of rights. The question is, should we hand out these rights?
Perhaps it's something like shared values. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe there's a general assumption. Maybe this assumption is not true anymore, by the way. But maybe there's a general assumption that everybody within this nation generally subscribes to the same fundamental ideals laid out in the Declaration of Independence, etc. They are American, not just in location, but in values. And people from outside the country might not necessarily share our bedrock values. So we need to make sure that they actually want to be one of us in terms of values before we let them in. Maybe that's an idea. Or what do you think?
Of course, I mean, most people who could convince us they share our values, we still won't let them in. Because we have pretty strict limits on who can come in, and convincing us you share our values doesn't do it for us.
Right. Maybe it's
but of course people. So why can't a city say, well, sure, our city shares American values, but we have some extra city values, and you need to show us you share our city values before you can come here. Why can't a city have some extra values they add on to the national values?
Well, I wouldn't be super opposed to that, for the record, but maybe
I think many people wouldn't, but still there's the fact we haven't done it, and we prohibit it is the more striking thing,
which is interesting. I mean, maybe you're right. Maybe it's just maybe you can't really point to a reason other than the importance of sovereignty. Well, maybe it's just
I was suggesting a reason in the post, and other people commenting suggested similar reasons. But so the idea is that once upon a time, and perhaps in the future also, nations fought wars.
Yes.
And it was important that the people in a nation identified with that nation enough to fight the wars. And,
right, exactly.
Suffer what it took to fight those, right? So there was a demand for creating allegiance and connections to a nation, right? It wasn't just about quality control. It was also about creating this sense of allegiance and an obligation to a nation to fight the wars. And so then you might think, well, if we have all these nested scales, any of which can keep people out, maybe we wouldn't be so attached to the national level. We become attached to the state or to the city or to the neighborhood, because they would have also markers of our allegiance. That is, because they could keep us out and they let us in, we'd go, well, I guess I sort of owe something to the city because they'll let me in here and I've been here all these years. And so if the city asks something of me, I guess I should give something to the city. And the more our allegiance would spread across all these other units, maybe the nation wouldn't get so much allegiance. Maybe it wouldn't get such attachment. And so the nations have said, well, we want all the allegiance. We want all the attachment. We don't want all these other units there. That's not going to be, we don't want attachment to those things. So we're going to prevent those things from doing the kinds of things that might make you feel more of an allegiance.
Right. We don't want LA and San Diego to go to war, for example.
Well, just if there's a war that's affecting the East Coast and is not affecting the West Coast, we don't want the West Coast to say, well, what's that to us? So, you East Coast people with your problem, and we'll stay over here and deal with our own problems, right?
Yeah. So I guess the question is that still a useful reason? Do we still care about sovereignty that much? I mean, like,
would
it seems
care
like the
about war.
solution to this would just be to abolish borders and just go global, right? Like, that would be the idea, and then everybody owes everybody a little bit of something or something like that. Would that be the
Well,
idea? Be the idea?
do do you believe that war is over?
No, I do not believe that
Is a
war is
very
over.
central.
I also don't love the idea of
Okay.
global government. Naturally equilibrate.
Yeah.
That's a polity size that was kind of stable. Global's too big, city state is too small. Modern state is kind of somewhere stable-ish, and so we needed to have those. In order to have those, we had to have sovereignty. In order to have sovereignty, you have to control your borders. Therefore, you have to have some limits on immigration. Maybe.
So this raises a different topic that I'm going to initiate here
Yeah,
because I'm
please.
especially interested, which is we're moving toward world government in ways that people don't realize. So if
The
you
last
look
show
at
was about the
formal
WEF.
world, if you're looking at formal government like Davos or United Nations, yes, formal government has stayed weak, and especially so. That is, whenever we make a new international body, the official rules are usually very weak, so that people don't have to be afraid that their national sovereignty will be compromised, and some international organization will have to tell them what to do. Right. So the world has been very sensitive about keeping each nation free to do whatever it wants, and therefore international bodies have, on paper, been relatively weak.
Yes.
But what people haven't noticed is that the world has created an elite community that identifies more with that community than it does with their particular nations. So Davos is just one of many examples. There are many people who are rich and powerful and influential and articulate, who are basically meet each other a lot around the world, talk to each other a lot, and have more of an allegiance to that world community than they do to any particular nation. That's happened in the last half century that wasn't true before. And because of this, regulation around the world is remarkably convergent. So we saw this at the beginning of COVID. That is, at the beginning of COVID, the usual pandemic experts said their usual things they had before. They said travel restrictions aren't very useful and masks aren't that important. And then elites around the world talked in February and March of 2020. They talked a lot, and they came to some conclusions that differed from what the experts were saying. And they agreed together, nope, we need masks, we need travel restrictions, we need lockdowns. And then the whole world did it their way.
Right.
The whole world pretty much followed the elites. And that is this elite community, because each expert in each elite in each nation wants to be respected by this world community.
Right.
And if they were to deviate from this world community, they would be more shamed and a pariah relative to this world community. And everybody wants to be respected by the same world community, so they all do it the same. And this is true not just for pandemics, for lots of regulatory areas, for electromagnetic spectrum, for power regulation, for airline regulation, for banking regulation, for just a lot of different kinds of regulation. Basically, the world does it pretty much the same everywhere, even though there is no world government to tell them so, because each regulator of banking in a particular nation wants to be respected by the other banking regulators in the world. And if they were to have their country deviate, other people would gossip and complain and say, that nation is doing things different, and they would be unhappy. So a concrete example, Iran is the only country in the world at the moment that allows organ sales. Even relatively government set prices and control, but it's the only country that allows it. And bioethicists around the world hate this. And they talk all the time about how to get Iran to stop allowing organ sales, because they are a pariah.
But Iran doesn't care.
The elites disagree with how to do that. But the Iran elites do care about what the other elites think of them. Maybe the people in Iran don't care, but the elites who are running these things care, because they want to be respected by the rest of the world. And that's how it goes for all the nations and all the elites in all of them. They all want to be respected by the world.
So what about countries like China? Because China locked down and they did the mask thing, but they've been doing it like way, way longer and way stricter than most other nations.
So there is some variation, right? There is variation. So the key thing to watch is when there's variation, doesn't look like they won or lost as a result of their deviation. So what the elites mainly want to have in the world is just to show that, look, whenever you deviate from what we say, that goes badly. And so that everybody can be learning the lesson, do it our way. So,
You think that's
initially
true?
China looked pretty good for deviating, but, over the 3 years, it looked bad. China lost by deviating.
Right.
Russia is clearly deviating from a world consensus and attacking Ukraine, and they're losing. And
Yeah.
the world's seeing the lesson. You don't do that. In China, they were, they had genetic engineering experiments. So people I know in the U.S., they know like the U.S. and Europe is very restrictive about genetic engineering. But they said to themselves, but Chinese are different. They think differently about genetic engineering. So they're going to allow a lot more genetic engineering. But China allowed some things for a while, but then in the last few years, they really shut it down because they didn't want other people gossiping and saying those Chinese are doing these, bad, unethical experiments that the rest of the world disapproves of. And China didn't want that reputation. They said, nope, we're following the rules of everybody else. We're not going to allow.
He froze again. Come back. Come back to me. He's frozen momentarily. No! We lost him again. Fallen soldier once again. It's all right. Technical difficulties. We're working on it. I'm gonna invite him back to speakers. So I guess the next question, I'm gonna ask him this in a second, but I'm gonna give you guys a bit of a Xander Alliance. If you want to ask a question, go ahead and call in, buddy. If you can't call in, I'll read it for you. But if you can, call in and ask him yourself. We'd love to hear from you. Robin is still down there. I'm trying to get him back in speakers. I've invited him. But yeah, the next question I'm going to ask is if he thinks that this is a good thing. Because on some level, I guess the Globe's recommendations were to not do what China did, but then China did it. But on the other level, it's like, maybe not all these recommendations were all that good or all that true. And, maybe you lose something in that type of unity. Maybe countries kind of doing their own thing as a way to figure out what works and what doesn't. That's kind of an idea. Sounds very Illuminati-like the way he described it. It's not an official government, but it is a group of managerial elitists from all over the world who don't have their main allegiance to their country, but to this super secret club because they want to feel respected. Because ultimately, they just want to have to have their ego stroked and feel like they're important people. That last part is just me adding that on. Dr. Hanson didn't say that. No, you are correct. It's not really secret, says Colorado. You're right. It's not really secret. I'm just getting in the mood. You know how it is, Scott. No, it's not secret at all. No, not Illuminati. It's just he's back. Wonderful. It's okay. It's worth the wait.
What happened?
You froze and then you disappeared, and it was very sad. But we were just talking about basically variations about how China broke ranks and it didn't go well for them. My next question was, do you think that this is a good thing? This basically a group of managerial elites with less allegiance to their country and more allegiance to their super secret boy band. Oh no, did he leave again? Robin, Dr. Hanson, no. We had him back for a second. I use the term super secret boy band. If anybody can tell me what movie that's from and what character said it, I'll give you a gold star. I'm stealing that from somewhere. I'm gonna date myself and show how much of a nerd I am. So super secret boy band. Somebody find somebody out of any of these 17 people. If you can figure out where that comes from, go ahead. If somebody reminds me at the end of the show, I'll tell you where it's from. But until then, it will be a secret. Dr. Hanson, we had you and then we left him. Correct, Colorado. That is the right character. Now, what movie exactly? Dr. Hanson. It's okay. It's okay. I think it's just technical issues on his end. No fault of his own. I mean, what do you guys think? What do you guys think about this? I mean, I guess you could argue it's a stabilizing force on the globe, right? Because there's less variation between countries. But again, you might lose the ability to test things if most of the countries are operating in very similar manners. And you also run into the problem that if these global elite people who put themselves in charge, like if they're wrong, then that affects everybody to a large extent. You know, so um, we have to think about that. So, guys in chat, or if you want to call in, let me know what you think about this. We're just waiting on Dr. Hanson. I invited him. Okay, he's back up in speakers. Unmuted. Dr. Hanson, can you hear me? There you are again. I can see you, but I can't hear you. Still can't hear you, but I can see you. Picture's great. Oh,
This one.
okay, there you are. I think.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, you're back. It's all right.
Your app switched which thing was my mic to
No,
my.
it's hey, technology is a fickle thing. We're going to be talking about that next eventually. But yeah, I guess my question for you is this global, elitist group kind of setting the standard for everything? Do you think that's a good thing or not? Or is it both, and why? What do you think about this new change to the world order?
Well, I'm afraid of it,
Yeah.
but I get why people like it.
Right.
That is, look, like humans for a million years, or for a long time until 10,000 years ago, humans basically lived in small groups of like 30 people, and we made decisions communally, collectively, and we didn't, when we had violence, it was more like sexual jealousy or something. And we liked that world. We liked that world where we basically all sat around the campfire and decided what to do next and then did it. And we've been somewhat not liking the world where the world is divided up in these competing camps who fight, and sometimes they fight pretty fiercely. And so the option to have this world where we all get together and discuss things and then say, don't fight wars so much, that seems pretty attractive. And then people look at things like global warming or there are other things, and they really like the idea that we're all going to sort of get together and decide together what to do and solve our problems. You can see the emotional appeal of that. It has to be really strong. Okay.
So why are you afraid?
And it's only going to get stronger. Well, so
probably. I mean, unless there's a kickback.
Through all of human history and biology history, every system we've ever seen has rotted with time. They decay, they fall apart, they don't last. And the only long-term solution to rot has ever been new things replace old things. New things are fresh and less rotted, less decayed, and they can rise and grow for a while, and then old things replace them. This is true of firms, it's true of organisms, it's true of species, it's true of empires in history. Empires have risen and fallen, and in some sense rotted. So I worry that once we create this global system of elites and a community where they all kind of agree together and sort of add things to that system, they make rules here and regulatory agencies there, and we're just going to collect this global system that rots to get all together. Right. And now it'll be harder to replace it, you see. If the whole world is together enforcing a global togetherness and agreement, what happens as that slowly decays over time? How do we fix it then? That's the thing I most worry about.
Right. And this is something
that's it's a long-term worry. You can see it's not a short-term thing, but
that's a real thing. I mean, this while you were gone, I posed this question to the chat, is that the lack of diversification, right? Because if you have a global system, then when it rots, everything rots, as opposed to, each country rotting and then the other countries rising, and it's diversified. And it's the same thing with like maybe the COVID stuff. Like that's a whole nother topic, but like, let's say if those experts, well, not experts, but elites were wrong, then instead of like one country getting it wrong, it's like almost every country getting it wrong. So the centralization
Right.
kind of
So if
right.
you had a world government, it might authorize local experiments, but a world mob does not. A world community cannot really authorize local deviations from it for its experiments because each person is just trying to please the mob with their conformity to it. So that you just don't get as much experimentation or variation that way.
Yeah, exactly. So we got a caller in the queue, Xander. He has a question for you, so we're gonna let him in. Xander, you got like 2 minutes. You can ask a question.
Hey,
Maybe
Xander.
up if it's quick. Whatever you want to ask Dr. Hanson, please do. We also have people on YouTube who are typing some questions, so we might get to some of those, but they're the plebs. The people in calling are the important people.
Okay.
So
Okay.
Xander, ask your question, buddy.
Can you hear me?
Totally hear
I
you.
can. Yes.
Okay. So, Robin Hanson, I read your paper and it came at
Which one?
oh crap. The one about futarchy. And I wondered if you
Okay,
could
great.
welfare metric instead with a long-term survival metric.
There are lots of possibilities for creating the welfare metric. I was trying to be modular in my recommendations. So,
Okay.
as you might know, when you have a system with lots of parts, you usually want to propose changing one part at a time and not changing all the parts together in order to get people to consider your change, right? If your change requires everything change in the world, nobody's going to listen to that, right? People are only going to listen to proposals that change one part of the world and leave the other parts alone. So here, I was proposing how to change the fact judgment of government, but not the value judgment. I was trying to leave the value thing as similar to what we have now. That's not because I think that's the best thing, but it's the easiest to engage a proposal that way. So, here's a different thing you could do. You could have the value metric just be the total value of all property in the US, including the value of citizenship if you could sell it. So you could just maximize the total value of the US in terms of property sets. So that would be another thing you could do. And
Right.
yes, you could try to have some probability of long-term survival if you could sort of weigh different survivals. That would be another metric. I mean, but the question is, which metric do we choose and who chooses it? And that's a hard problem. And I wasn't proposing to solve that. So I was enough to say, look, I actually think the value part isn't where we go wrong the most. So we may be going wrong with values, but we go more wrong with facts.
Sure. Yeah.
And
That
so
was
trying to
first of
fix
all,
the fact part.
Yeah. Xander's question was also a YouTube question. You said that you don't think that most people go for something that wants to change everything, right? But it seems like some of our political narratives right now are in fact trying to change everything all the time right now, or the world will end. So that's kind of interesting. I prefer a world where we're a lot more specific and modular. Personally, it's part of why your theory appeals to me.
Well, I think what people are trying to do is collect threats to change everything, which they will then trade for changing something, right?
Mm-hmm.
They want to be able to say, look, I could make you change all 20 of these things, but I'll accept just these 3. How about that? We make a deal. I won't change the other 17, and we'll just change the 3 I want, right? So basically trying to collect chits for negotiation in order to change the things. But nobody's really going to try to change all 20 things at once. That's just not going to happen. Everybody knows it. But they want to act like, oh, I could, maybe I will do all these things. I'm kind of crazy. You can't predict me. You better accommodate me.
Right.
And that's a standard negotiating tactic, right?
Strategic ambiguity. Yeah. Xander, do you have anything else, or is that it? Because I have YouTube questions as well. But if you have a follow up, you can have one, Xander, since there's no one behind you.
Sure. Yeah. So so one of the things that came up for me was I was in jury duty, and we were basically, deciding whether he was innocent or guilty. And when I read your paper, it kind of struck home to me. I was basically deciding, the judge was deciding, and with their charge, what the probability was of a repeat offense, and we were trying to decide with the probability what was true or not. And so, your paper just was it really rang true for me, and I wondered, because we're thinking in stakes with stakeholders, what if we I guess your definition of a welfare metric is like way more like useful and flexible than mine. But I just thought there was such a connection between like having a stake in something and the survival of that thing, almost like kind of like hit it at the core. But yeah, that was it. I didn't really have a point in.
All right. Well, thanks,
Well,
Xander. I appreciate it.
definitions.
So
Yeah,
I
you
have a
do.
lot of other ideas for changing other things,
Yes.
including criminal law. So, I mean,
Oh.
you were thinking of, you could imagine just deciding a case based on the chance they will do it again or something. That would be, we could have a betting market that would give you that estimate instead of you guys sitting around discussing it. But I actually think there's an even better way to handle crime, basically.
Do you not think it?
But
do you think it should be based off of if he did it, you do the punishment, or do you think it should be something else?
Well, no, I think you need a judgment about who did what.
Right.
So, I don't see how you can have a decent legal system unless at some point you make a decent judgment about who actually did what.
Sure.
So, I would, whatever other reforms I would make, I wouldn't change that. We need some judgment like that. We need to say, did this person commit this crime or not? And then, how bad was it? And if that's hard, then we should find other ways to do that, which I could come up with things. But I was focused in crime on how to fix the rest of the system, aside from the judgment of who did what.
Right. We have some more
I think
questions.
we have a lot of other problems. Go ahead.
Yeah, we have one. He's asked one guy in chat named Dark Matter. He's asking why you think Scandinavian countries consistently rank in the top 5 countries in terms of overall welfare in the world. This is an interesting question. So why do you think that is exactly? That's his question. Dark Matters.
Okay. I mean, the obvious thing to say, which I'll just say, is look, the world's full of a lot of regions, and one of them had to be at the top.
It's a good reason.
It probably is a similarity in regions such that people in the same region are somehow doing a bunch of things similarly, right?
Yeah.
So I recently, for example, just visited Brazil. My friend visited Japan. The world has a huge variation about lots of different things. And it's just really hard for me to judge which things they're doing are better or worse because they're just doing all these different things in different ways. I'm happy to look at the places doing best and say, I guess on the average, you should try to be more like them. But it's really hard to look at all the things Scandinavian countries do and figure out, well, which are the things they're doing well? Because they're doing a lot of things, and probably not all of them are contributing. And that's the difficulty of making these judgments. But that's where, I would have the betting markets answer that question so I don't have to. So a fundamental question in the world is often, which questions do you think you need an answer to, as opposed to choosing a system that will answer the question for you, and then you don't have to answer it other than picking a system.
It's self-reported a lot of the time, too. I believe that the way they get some of these metrics, at least for the happiest countries, is that they basically ask citizens. So part of it might just be culture, right? Like some cultures just might promote like contentment, and other cultures might promote chasing, which makes them more dissatisfied.
Scandinavia's rich, okay? You got to admit they're rich.
They are rich.
You look at
it's definitely part of it.
That's not nothing. That's not just how they answer surveys. Yeah. They're rich and they're peaceful. Crime rates are low. They got a lot of money. They got a lot of free time. They seem to be happy. So I'm happy to give it to you, saying, okay, looks like they're near the top. But how exactly to judge what's causing them to be there to top? That's the tough part, right? Like, if you made your country speak their language, would you be as rich as them? Probably not.
Well, it's
probably
exactly.
The language isn't it.
No, I know, but it's so interesting because the Nordic countries have like super, super high tax rates. And if you tried to do that, like, I don't know, in the US or other European countries, it would not make them happier. It would make them more upset. So it's interesting.
So they're actually not very high regulation.
Well, so I said high taxes. Do they not have high taxes?
High taxes, but not high regulation, right?
Right.
So their firms are actually relatively free to do stuff.
I do know this, yes.
They tax a lot, but then they pay for a lot of services for those taxes. So, basically they're doing government the right way, in the sense that if you're going to do government, what you want is for it not to regulate too much, and you want it to just do a few services that are really important and do them cheap and efficiently, and have that be done with it
as efficiently as possible. IDK, one of our callers, says that it's probably due to less relative deprivation. She cites like less relative poverty, so it's not about absolute wealth, although it's partially that.
Right.
It's also about like there's not people that are like that much richer than you, which seems right to me. That's upsetting to people.
So remember we discussed quality control and the jealousy of nations wanting to do it and not let other units do it. A similar issue applies to redistribution. Another name for redistribution is insurance, you see.
Right, but it's voluntary.
And
Insurance is voluntary.
Nations have taken over this redistribution insurance role, but they didn't have to do that. We didn't have to have nations doing that. We could have had other social units taking on the insurance redistribution role. But nations wanted to do that in order to gain loyalty. That is, whichever unit is doing the redistribution insurance for you, you have more attachment to that. And so governments have jealously tried to sort of be the ones who do that and not let other units do it very much.
Right.
And
causes a little bit
in
of
principle, we could let us, insurance could be provided by private insurance companies. You could have private insurance for unemployment and poverty and other sorts of things.
Right.
There's no fundamental obstacle to those kind of insurances being provided privately, but in Scandinavia, the government's providing it, and then people have an attachment to those governments because they're providing it, but they could have provided by others if only they'd let it, right?
Right.
So that's another one of the examples where nations are doing a thing that people go, ooh, I'm grateful for the nations to doing that. And the nations are preventing other people from doing that, other units from doing that thing, so that you will be grateful to the nation, right?
Right. It's like they're mandatory stock. It's like this is a very anarchist way of thinking about it, but it's like Stockholm syndrome, right? It's like they're just
imagine your friend would drive you anywhere that you asked, and you're really grateful to your friend. Your friend will just drive you anywhere, and then you try to buy your own car, and they say no, you can't. They prevent. No, you can't have a car. No, you can't ride the bus. You can't take Uber. You could just go with me, right? So
but my car's faster. It's like I don't care. Use mine.
Right. They're saying, no, you got to use this, right? So that should be a question you often ask when somebody's being generous to you, but they're not letting you get an even more generous offer from somebody else.
Right. It's akin more if your friend has like a van and he drives all your friends around. You're like, I want to buy a new car that goes faster. He's like, no, that's not fair for all the other friends who are stuck with me. You have to stay in the car.
Right.
Yeah. Interesting. All right, so I have a couple that are a little bit rapid fire, but not too rapid fire because I want to hear. What is a technological singularity? What is that? What does that mean? Because I don't know.
The concept is the idea that technology is accelerating, and therefore it makes it harder to see into the future. And then there's some point in the future where there's a horizon, say, that you can't see past, or you can't see so well past, or there's a moment in time where you have a really fast change. So people have been ambiguous about what that term means, actually.
So how thick is the horizon time-wise? Is the horizon like a second of thickness? You know what I mean?
So actually, it depends on which kinds of things you're predicting, how far in advance you can predict. So there is no like single time when you can't see past it. You can see some things farther than others. So in that sense, there is no singularity. But I think it makes more sense to say, look, we're in an era with a certain rate of change. We've been in past eras with different rates of change, slower rates of change, and there were these sudden transitions. So all of history so far for humans can be roughly summarized as humans, separated from the other primates and animals 1 million years ago. And then humans started growing with culture faster than other primates. And then 10,000 years ago, we started having farming, which then grew much faster in farming than it did previously. And then a few hundred years ago, we had the Industrial Revolution, and now the economy is growing even much faster. And in each of these areas, we had relatively steady growth, but then there were these sudden transitions where the growth rate of the world economy jumped by a factor of 50 or 250, right? So within less than a doubling time, suddenly the growth rate just went way up. And that's happened 3 times in history. 3 times, suddenly the growth rate jumped a whole bunch in a short time.
Agriculture, Industrial Revolution, and what's the third one?
Humans. First humans showing up at all.
Oh, the existence of humanity in the first place. Okay.
Right, with cultural evolution. So 3 times we had these huge bursts of growth rate in the economy. So it seems to me sensible to say, could that happen again? Could we have another sudden burst in the growth rate of the economy? And if it followed the previous patterns, say it would happen in maybe 5 years, and then after the end of 5 years, instead of the economy at the moment doubling every 15 years, it might double every month. That would be
crazy, wouldn't it?
That would be just the straightforward projection of the past trend here, right? Again, we had sort of,
that's what we need. We need more change faster.
That deserves the name. That deserves the name singularity, right? Whatever else 100%. You're going to define singularity, if that thing happens, fine. I'm going to give that name to it, right?
And what?
So then that's the question: will that happen?
Will that happen? I don't know. Maybe. Probably.
Well, we'll see. We can investigate. That is, we can think about that.
Yeah.
And we can actually go somewhere with that topic. So one thing we can ask is the current growth rate anywhere near sort of fundamental limits, right? Could we grow a lot faster?
I mean, it's hard to know from our position, but it seems
we know a lot, actually. We know a lot about the causes of growth, the causes of innovation, and we know enough to say, no, we're not anywhere near fundamental limits.
So what are the fundamental limits that we're not near?
Well, so if you ask people what would be the most likely cause of such an acceleration, usually it's something like artificial intelligence. That would be the story, okay? Mm-hmm. And there's a simple calculation that fits with that. So ordinary factories today, they cost a certain amount to make the factory, and then they produce a certain amount in the factory per month. And if we ask, how many months does it take for a factory, typical, to have the amount of stuff that comes out of the factory be comparable to the value of the factory itself? And that's typically just a few months. So if we could make in factories everything that a factory needs to make stuff, the economy could double every few months. The reason the economy doesn't double every few months is because there are things like people that you can't make in factories.
Right.
You have to make them in much slower ways, right?
But AI if you had like AI,
if an AI could be made in a factory, you see, then an AI-based economy could, in fact.
Oh no. Oh no. No. We've lost him again. No. No. Lost him again. The next logical question. Yeah, I think it's just Dr. Hanson's internet, and I don't really think it's his fault. IDK says, is he in Santa Monica? I've heard they have terrible internet. They do have terrible internet. I've been there. That's real. Myth confirmed. We'll wait for Robin to come back. So yeah, I mean, what we were just talking about is AI, and AI, I don't know. AI is kind of scary to me. But yeah, like he seems to be right. It's if what we have can build the things that we use to make shit, so factories can build the stuff that we need to make factories, then we can double pretty quickly our production. But we're missing people. The things that people provide is kind of the bottleneck. But yeah, theoretically, I would solve that. So that's an interesting idea I hadn't heard before. Now, Dr. Hanson has also talked about like robot apocalypses. So we're gonna talk about robot apocalypses in a second. Travis with the plug. Yes, when we are not live on Callin, we are hanging out on our Discord channel. Everyone is free to join, and he dropped the link. It is so true. As much as we love these shows, they're not on all the time. And if you want to talk about this stuff with other people, we have dozens and dozens of voice channels and text channels on everything from science to economics to philosophy, morality, even some meme channels. So if you want to just, be able to talk to people about basically anything at any time, get some opinions, get some conversation going, sharpen your skills at communication and persuasion, and also get yourself humbled, then join up because we got some smart people. We have some interesting people and it's worth joining up. Dr. Hanson, I've lost you again. It is so sad. Please join back to speakers. Okay, he's back now. Okay, I've invited him. Colorado says the Rob Apocalypse. To play on Dr. Hanson's name, but also robots. All right, he's back in speakers. He's unmuted. Will the camera come back? Wait and see. It's gonna be like a 2-minute turnaround since the break to when he's back. It's pretty quick. Hello. Is he's up in speakers and he says he's back. Will the camera come on? Yes.
Whoa.
It seems it's just the cost of doing business. Every half hour, it's just gonna crap out.
Man. I fear it's my internet. Somehow it's not showing any problems, but then I'm doing a speed test over here, and speed test isn't looking so good. So that suggests it's my problem. It means I'm just gonna have to dump my supplier and switch. I think that's what I gotta do. Anyway, but
it's all right. Hey, no worries. I get it. So we were talking about robots. So we were talking about how AI could double production. I also saw that you talked about like robots and computers taking over. So that's a fun topic to close out the show with in this last 15 minutes. I want to talk about robots and aliens.
Okay.
At the end here. So robot apocalypse. Do you think that's real? What does it look like? Or transhumanism, maybe?
So I think human level robots are coming sometime in the next century. You got to kind of count on that. That's coming. And when they do, most humans will lose their jobs. So you can still have a nice life because if you've saved up enough other capital. So say the robot economy doubles every month. Well, that means your investments double every month. So you don't have to have that much to start with to get rich pretty fast if your investments are doubling every month. So humans overwhelm all.
Oh no, he froze again. No way. It's not fair. You can't do it this quickly. Come back. No. It's so sad. No. I mean, yeah, maybe the robots will be our workers and we'll all of us turn into stock bros. We all turn into... He's back. Okay, very quickly. Okay. Beautiful. I lost you at we can live off our investments basically. I heard that.
Right. So if humans start out owning pretty much all the robot world, and if their wealth doubles every month, collectively humans can do great when robots replace humans.
And you think that's happening?
You might want to not. You might not. Well, it's not happening yet. We're nowhere near it.
Well, do you think it will happen?
Sometime in the next few centuries. Not the next few years.
All right. Well, I hope it's my lifetime.
Well, you might hope that it is. So I have this book called The Age of M about a different kind of robot replacing human. It's a very human-like robot. It's a robot that you could maybe be, called the brain emulation, where you could become a brain emulation and then you would be the robot.
But is that really me, though? That's just a copy of me. Is that really me? It's like the Star Trek thing. It's like every time they got beamed up, they just got killed.
I'm 63 years old, and the 20-year-old me, was that me or is that some other guy, right? I mean, we all have to deal with changing as we age, over time. We aren't the same person we were before, but we're close. We're close enough that we care about the other person, and that's kind of all you really can hope for.
Well, I think it really depends on if you believe in a soul or not, right? It's like if you have like a perfect imprint of memories and stuff, then it's still you. But if you don't believe in something like a soul, then it is still you. But if you believe in something like a soul, then it's
even if you believe in a soul, you might believe the soul moves over. So
the soul jumps.
Why not?
I mean, maybe. I don't know. It just feels weird. I'd be worried about that. They'd be like, all right, we are going to technically kill your organic body, but we have a perfect copy of your mind over here. See, I imagine it like the robot wakes up before I fall asleep and it looks at me and it's like, what's up, dude? And then I die. And then it's just a copy of me. It's not me. You know what I mean? Is that a concern? Or you're not concerned?
Look, you're kind of young now. I'm telling you that in 30 years, you'll look back and you'll realize you're not the same person.
All right.
I mean, that's just who you're going to be. You're going to be a different, interesting person, maybe a better person, maybe worse, but you won't be exactly the same person. Over time, you become different.
Yeah, but
you don't know that. I'm the guy to tell you, but
At least I have my
you're-
body for continuity, though. If maybe it doesn't mean anything, maybe it's just a safety blanket.
No.
But,
In 30 years, when you look at your body, you'll go, no, that's not continuity. That's a different body you're going to have in 30 years. Really, it'll be different. It won't be the same body.
It's the same thing.
No,
it's
it's
no
not
real.
the same thing.
I mean, it's a really interesting philosophical question, though. Is like what
This
makes.
isn't a philosophical. This is real. You are going to be 30 years older someday, and you will look at yourself, and you will see that you are in fact different. It's not an abstract thing. You will in fact be different. You will have a different body. You will have different memories. You'll have different personality. You'll have different priorities. You will be different in 30 years.
Right,
It will
but
happen one day at a time, but you will be
right.
different.
But I'll still have a sense of being me, right? Right.
Well, it'll be illusory. I mean, you won't be you. You won't be the same person. You will have changed.
Well, it depends on how you define you. That's my point of why it's kind of an interesting
but you
question.
can identify with your past self. You can feel a strong camaraderie and connection to your past self. And you could maybe even see that you've realized your past self's goals and ambitions. You've stayed true to your past self's principles. Those are things that connect you across time. Those are important values. But you will actually be different. And the same way for the robot version of you. Right? The robot version of you can have your values, and it can stay true to your principles, and it can have your memories, but it's going to be different.
So you've almost convinced me, but there's one scenario in which that I think isn't possible normally. Because when you're transferring your consciousness to a robot, like as I say, I don't know if you heard this, you said I was cutting out. You could transfer your consciousness to a robot or have a copy of your memories or whatever in a robot.
Yeah.
But then the robot can wake up and come over and look at you while you like fade out in existence. And that doesn't happen organically, right? Right. Like that doesn't happen without robots. That feels a little bit different.
We have these video camera things like we're using now. So you can take a video of yourself last year and look at it a year later and sort of see what you were like when you were different, right?
And I guess my past self technically died.
Yes, he did.
Oh God.
He quite literally died. Yes, he's gone. He's nowhere around. You can't find him anywhere. He's gone.
This is a philosophical question, though, to some extent. There's not this is a real question about what qualifies.
You just have a choice of what you identify with, like your past self, your future self, your twin brother, your children. There are all these different creatures in the world, and they aren't exactly you, but to some of them you identify with and feel a stronger connection than others. That's your choice.
Right, but those versions of you never exist at the exact same time. They're always sequential, and I think that might be the trippy thing about robots. There's a good show with Paul Rudd called Living with Yourself on Netflix. It's like a comedy. Yeah, right. Like that's the thought that comes to me. I'm like that would be terrifying. But it's interesting.
Great.
You'd think that like me being younger, I'd be more like open to this kind of stuff, but I guess not.
Honestly, apparently twins have an extra quality of life the rest of us don't have because they have someone who is very similar, identical twins at least. They have somebody in their life who's just very similar to them that they can relate to, and it just adds a lot of value. I understand.
Right.
And the rest of us don't have that, but with robots we could.
Yeah, everybody, watch Living with Yourself. It's great. It's like fundamentally, it's like scary and sad while also being hilarious. It's pretty interesting. I also saw something about Pascal's wager, but like about aliens. So I have an inkling of what this means, but apparently this was from you as well.
I don't remember saying something about that exactly.
Okay, well, it's possible the website I'm going off of is just wrong.
I mean, we can try to generate something there, but basically,
yeah, I mean, I think the inkling is basically like for those of you who don't know what Pascal's wager is it doesn't matter if you really believe in God, but if you don't believe in God and you're wrong, you get tortured forever. So you should probably believe in God just as an insurance policy. So maybe it's the same thing with aliens. You should believe in aliens just because.
Well, so I mean, the big question about aliens is what do they want? What's their agenda, right? So if you ever meet aliens, you should be asking yourself that question. Once you are convinced, like, yes, these really are aliens, you should ask yourself, well, which kind of aliens are they? Because there's lots of different kinds, and what do these ones want exactly, right? Because that'll make a big difference to your life in the near future after that, right? So aliens, by assumption, almost surely are far more advanced and powerful than us, right?
If they make it to us, for sure.
Right, and their civilization is going to be just much older than ours. And So they will just have capabilities and knowledge far beyond ours. They're probably artificial, so they've long since gotten past the robot thing. Okay?
I think so, definitely.
Their whole civilization's artificial. They don't keep legacy squishy bio stuff anymore. They make stuff in factories and they design it in engineering studios, and that's just who they are. But
they engineer. That's interesting. They might engineer senses, right? Like they give themselves
Sure.
like new senses. That's great.
They would. So, like whatever alien bodies you see standing in front of you, you have to know that they could change those relatively easy, and they could probably switch to a different body in a few seconds. And so they're not really very attached to whatever body you're seeing them standing in front of you with, because this is for your presentation for you. This is a show for you.
Right.
Okay. But if they're there and talking to you, then the key question is, well, what do they want? And so I've done this analysis of aliens in the universe that actually tells you a lot about what they want. And so the key idea is there's two kinds of aliens: the loud and the quiet. So the loud are the ones that would just be really obvious, and we would see them in the sky if they weren't if they were around. And so we can see that we don't see the loud ones. That's a key big piece of data, right? And we do our calculation analysis to find out that basically the nearest loud one is like once per million galaxies, and we'll meet them in roughly 1 billion years. And so we've done the math.
Wait, you calculated that?
Yes, absolutely. That's the whole point of our analysis. We figured out how far away are the nearest aliens and when will we meet them. And so
how can you be so sure?
Because we've got a 3-parameter model, and each of the parameters is fit to data. So we have data that tells us each of the parameters in the 3-parameter model, and the 3-parameter model tells you the answers I just told you. So that's it. We have
so it's going to be in 1 billion years.
On average, it'd be roughly 1 billion years.
Give or take how much? Within reason.
Could be 200 million years. It could be 20 billion years.
Okay.
But within a factor of 2 to 4 or something, roughly 1 billion years. So, but those are the loud ones. Those are the big obvious ones. So you would see those coming. So if somehow you met an alien tomorrow, it wouldn't be one of those. What you're going to meet is a quiet alien. So that means there are also aliens out there who are not big and loud, and that's an important thing to know about them. That is, so we talked about the world government and liking sort of having a unified civilization. Every alien civilization will know that for a while they will have that. They will have some sort of unified government and unified society and unified community. But as soon as they allow interstellar colonization, as soon as they allow any one part of them to head out to the stars, that will end. The end of it, the unified community will end, and they will go back to competition and evolution and strangeness. So many alien civilizations will choose not. They will say, no, we like it this way. We like to be together, deciding things together, regulating ourselves together, preventing ourselves from becoming weird and strange, preventing war. We like that. And so we're not going to allow any part of ourselves to head out and colonize the universe, because that will end this era. And they would be quiet.
Right. So they intentionally stop their progress, basically.
Well, they limit it in a certain key way, in that they don't spread out across space, which would then end this era of unified decision making and community.
Do you think we'll be loud aliens, humans?
Well, I hope so, but this is a big choice we will face. But the key point is, if you ever meet an alien, it's one of these quiet ones. And now you have to ask, well, the quiet ones, they sort of stay home and they don't let people go anywhere. So why is this one here?
You read my mind.
Is clearly an exception to the usual thing. So they've had to allow a very unusual exception to allow that alien to come here. Because otherwise, they usually, they would be, if they just let any aliens of their civilization travel anywhere they want, then clearly it would just be over, and they would no longer have this unified community. So they've allowed one of those to come here. And the question is why? What would be so important for them to come here? And the obvious answer is to enforce their rule. They have this rule against interstellar colonization, and we are risking violating that rule. And so their obvious priority for being here is to tell us not to do that.
We're eyeing Mars pretty heavily at the moment. Yeah.
Right. They're going to disapprove of that sort of thing. And so that would be, so I can figure out, given me the assumption that you tell me you see aliens tomorrow and they're here, but I look in the sky and they're not anywhere up there, I can already draw some pretty big conclusions from that.
Right. So what about so as far as comparing likelihood for quiet aliens, you seem to think those are going to be sooner or more likely or are more common?
We are now quiet.
We are
One
quiet.
day, we are now quiet. We are small. We
Yeah.
don't make much noise. We haven't expanded out to do much. We are now quiet. We could eventually become loud, but we may not. So a key question in general is the ratio of quiet to loud aliens out there. So
Right.
again, we've got this model that tells us how often loud ones appear, but how often quiet ones appear depends on that ratio. Is it
Well,
2 to
appear
1,
in the
10 to
universe
1,
or
a
appear
million to
to
1?
not? When you say
Just
quiet,
in the
appear.
universe.
Okay.
Well, I just mean quiet are just so small that you'd have to be really close to see them.
Right. Well, those
So
are different
almost
questions, though, right? Like how many quiet alien civilizations there are in the universe is different from how many quiet alien civilizations have a visitor that human beings have seen. Those are not the same thing.
right. So you have to ask, like, why would they be here? So
Right.
the obvious puzzle is, like, even if say the ratio is 1,000 to 1, well, that if the loud ones appear once per million galaxies, the quiet ones would appear once per 1,000 galaxies. But then having one in our galaxy near us would still be crazy unlikely. And so you have
So
to
you
ask,
don't think there's any
how,
aliens in our galaxy, in the Milky
well,
Way? No
not
way.
according to the simple model, but there's a variation on the model that would make more sense of them. So if you tell me you see an alien, I'm going to have to go with this variation that makes more sense of them. And the
Okay.
variation that makes more sense of them is that they are our panspermia siblings. So
I don't know what that means.
panspermia is the model that life didn't start on Earth. It started somewhere else, some Eden, and then life transferred from Eden to Earth, and then it may have also transferred elsewhere.
You're like what? Comets?
Well, when our Earth was formed, when our sun was formed, was in a nursery where 1,000 other stars were all being formed in the same time and place, very close to each other, with lots of rocks flying back and forth. So if you had seeded any of that,
I've lost him again. We were just about to finish too. Okay, come on. Okay, he's back. All right, perfect. Right, so they're all together, so it wouldn't be too hard to transfer. I get it.
right? And so then they drift apart. But those other stars, those other 1,000 stars, are now our siblings. And if advanced life appeared on them before us, then they would be close enough to come visit.
What about the theory that we're just the first because the universe is kind of a baby at the moment? I've heard that. You think that's likely or not really? Oh, he's gone again. Oh, it's so sad. All right, well, this is basically the time where I wanted to end the show, but I want to actually say goodbye to him, so we're going to fill the dead time until he comes back so I can say goodbye. Oh, Scott, hey, let's talk for now.
Yeah, I was just gonna say we don't even have to be the first, right? Like we could just be like there could be pockets over billions of years where like the stars that came out before us, there is life forms that were aliens or whatnot, but they're gone now, right? So like it's this
Yeah,
kind
like
of
it's also possible that it's not very many civilizations made it, right? Very
yeah,
far.
yeah. I mean, I mean, that could be the thing. Most civilizations could get to a certain level, and like, you just never hear them. Like, you'd have to have, like, to me, it seems you'd have to have a certain level of scientific advancement to be able to even travel to another star in a reasonable amount, like in a reasonable amount, where like it would make
Right,
sense
where it's
to
useful.
use this. Yeah, because if
Right.
it's like if it's a
And you also have to
generation.
remember it's like not all life is going to be conscious, right? And we still don't understand consciousness at all. So
Well,
it's not just a
what
question of life, it's a question of consciousness. And then
what
it's a question of, as you
what
say, advancement.
what I'm thinking about, like if it's generational ships, like right. So if you send out a generational ship to go and like contact some uh planet to say, hey, you guys can't be doing this. I mean, that doesn't really make sense because things are gonna happen over that generation or however many generations it takes. You'd have to have a highly advanced technological society.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, Scott and I were just talking about the level of scientific advancement. It's just to travel that far in a way that's useful, like like we can't really conceive of like what you'd have to be able to do that. Like that's crazy. You need like wormholes, right? I can't hear you. I can't hear you, Dr. Hanson. You gotta switch your mic. There you are.
It's right. It is on. Okay, can you
Yeah,
hear me
there
now?
you go. Yeah,
Okay.
I think. Yeah,
I mean, I think we know enough physics to know roughly what you'd have to do. We just are far from being able to do it. So
Wormhole.
knowing what, say, interstellar travel or other sorts of things.
I just
we
think
know.
of the movie Interstellar. That's just what I think of.
But basically, we know enough physics to know roughly how to do these things. It's just way past our budget. We just aren't rich enough to do them.
Right.
But being not rich enough to do something is different than not knowing how to do it if you were rich.
Right.
Well, isn't it also technology? Like, I remember hearing something that there's a certain point where it doesn't make sense to send people out to the stars, because if you just waited 10 years, those people who left 10 years after them got to the star and back while they're still like in the middle of travel. I don't know what that was.
Right. Right. No, I get the idea, right? Because technology advances, and if you send out a ship that's too slow, you'll send out a technologically advanced ship later on that will just outpace it to the point that the first one was useless.
There we go.
Yeah, I get that idea.
Can
Yeah.
you hear me, see me?
Yeah, we got you. Well,
Okay.
I mean, it's working out because we're nearing the end of our show here.
Okay, sorry.
No, hey, it's not on you. This conversation was fantastic. I enjoyed it. I think everybody enjoyed it. Although I do want to know, what do you said we know how to do it if we were rich enough? How would we do it? Would it just would it be wormholes? Would that be the thing? How would we do it? Move that quickly. Oh, he's bugged out again. I don't know. It's at the end. It's at the very end. It's just becoming undoable. It's so sad. It's not his fault. It is not Dr. Hanson's fault. It is the cursed internet. He seems so comfortable with the machines, and yet they rebel. All right, back again. Finally,
Hello,
I think we're good.
back again. Yes,
It's
indeed.
okay. I don't know what's going on either. Don't worry about it. But yeah, how would we do it? You said that we know how. What physics do we know on how to do it?
So basically, we can fit things we care about into really tiny packages.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we just put each atom exactly where we want it, we can make very small, very intricate things where a human mind could fit in a very tiny space.
Mm.
And so small things can be shot long distances much more cheaply. And so you just have rockets and laser sails, and you just send things a very long way, very fast. We already kind of know how to do that. There's actually an organization now trying to make a starship that'll send a little tiny chip at a substantial fraction of the speed of light in the next few decades. That's already something we are on the verge of being able to do now. So you tell me about thousands of years, we're just going to be far beyond that.
Very cool. Interesting. That is interesting. Maybe we'll be alive to see it. Maybe we'll be in computers. Who knows?
Your descendants will be robots. Sorry.
Oh God.
All of our descendants will be robots. They'll all be artificial.
My descendants are going to be Luddites. Are going to be the equivalent of Luddites. No, maybe not. Maybe they will be robots. Who knows? It's also interesting. Well, thank you for being on the show. Thank you for agreeing to talk to me. This was a ton of fun. Like I said, we covered a lot of ground. We went from democracy as speculation all the way to aliens and robots. So,
Right. And if we ever talk again, we have a lot more subjects we could.
Yeah, that was only like 2/3 of my questions. So, but alas, I am out of time. So, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Nice to meet you, Trav.
Have a good one. Everybody, we've already done the plug. I'm going to shamelessly plug again. Join the Discord. It's good. It's a good way to talk to people. It's a good way to hear new ideas and get challenged on stuff. It's good for you. It's good for your brain. And we'd all love to have you. And then apart from the Discord server, please subscribe to the show, to the Pangburn Hangout. Now, it's okay if you subscribe just so you can come and watch my show. That's totally acceptable and understandable. But you do have to subscribe to the show overall in order to do that. So please do. We have shows every Monday. For the next month, we're going to have shows every Friday as well, which is interesting, interviewing wonderful people like Dr. Hanson, just because the scheduling has been so great. So yeah, please come back. Please subscribe. Thank you all. And I will see you all next time on the War of Ideas.